Welcome everyone back to weekly weather updates, and in today's video we're going to have the latest on what's going on up in the stratosphere as we are on the cusp of a major sudden stratospheric warming. Now we've spoken about this a number of times over the past few weeks, from rumblings about this about 3 or 4 weeks ago to about a week or two ago, a strong signal of a sudden stratospheric warming, and now it looks like we are going to see a major sudden stratospheric warming where the winds are going to reverse to an easterly, and we are going to see the polar vortex getting absolutely obliterated. This is one of the most severe sudden stratospheric warmings I've seen in many, many years, and yeah, it is going to really put some shockwaves through the stratosphere, and I would be very surprised if we didn't see impacts in the troposphere over the next few weeks. Now, normally when we talk about a sudden stratospheric warming, many people associate it with the beast from the east, and it is correct to associate a sudden stratospheric warming with increased risk of colder patterns. However, there are two major things we have to take into account. Number one, the beast from the east is the sort of 1% option. Yes, we are more likely to see colder patterns as a result of this, but the beast from the east is right on the top end. We've had numerous other sudden stratospheric warmings where very little has happened, or just more of a moderate colder spell for a few weeks, perhaps some more of a southerly tracking jet stream, just no major tropospheric impacts. Some impacts, but nothing on that scale. And the second thing we have to take into account is this is occurring in mid-March, not in early Feb like we saw in 2018. That 4 or 5 week gap means that we're not going to see bitterly cold conditions. It's very, very unlikely. But what we're more likely to see is a continuation of blocking to our north and colder, unseasonably cold air masses coming our way in the coming weeks. It increases the risk of that. And through this week, we are seeing pretty cold conditions. Now, I think these colder conditions are slightly too early to attribute them to the sudden stratospheric warming. Perhaps they could be exacerbated by what's going on, but I don't think they are directly linked. So we'll have to wait and see what the impacts are over the next few weeks. But yeah, we could see recurring colder spells. And of course, it does have long-term impacts as well. 2018, remember, we saw one of the hottest summers we've seen ever. And that was indirectly because of the sudden stratospheric warming. Can't directly link it, but it's not a coincidence that we had the beast from the east and then record heat all in the months following that big warming. So yeah, this could have real big impacts on not only the next few weeks, but the next few months. So it is going to be one to keep a very close eye on. Now we'll start on the latest GFS run, and you see the major warming is already taking place. Now it's not a sudden stratospheric warming yet. As I'm recording this, we've not quite reached 0 meters per second high up above the North Pole, but we're basically there within the next 24 hours or so. You see the major warming continues to penetrate right into the Arctic, and the remnants of the polar vortex actually gets shoved over the UK and Western Europe. Now eventually, the polar vortex just dies away. Now normally, when we see these sudden stratospheric warmings, the polar vortex either gets displaced or split, but it eventually reforms and it cools down above the Arctic. But we're not seeing that. The polar vortex is in some form there, but we see a secondary warming perhaps later on this week, and the polar vortex just never recovers, and we go right to the end of the run. We're getting towards the end of March, and there is no polar vortex. So it does look likely that this sudden stratospheric warming ends the polar vortex for winter 2024-25, about 4 or 5 weeks earlier, and that is a very, very interesting thing, as that does mean that we're going to be in a reversal for the next few weeks, many weeks earlier than we normally are. Again, I can't say exactly what that's going to do, because this is not, unheard of, but it's not something we've seen in many years. So I don't know what impacts it will actually have at the surface, sort of this longevity of easterlies high up in the atmosphere, but definitely a possibility that it does drag out these late winter conditions, similar conditions to this week, dragging out through March, even into April, maybe even May, giving late season frosts, perhaps very up and down conditions, going from 20 degrees one day to 5 or 6 the next day. So yeah, it will be very interesting. But we can also have a look at the 10 HPA winds, and you can see the polar vortex is here. This one is going westerlies. The major warming is an area of high pressure, so it's called easterlies. And you can see that the polar vortex, or the remnants of it, gets completely shoved away, disintegrates, and then look at that, easterly winds high up in the atmosphere, all against the general flow in the northern hemisphere. And it means the jet stream is likely to be significantly weakened as this propagates through the atmosphere, perhaps distorted, amplified, and major blocking could occur. And you can see the polar vortex is there in some sense, but it's not over the Arctic, and that is the biggest thing. So it perhaps doesn't go to complete zero, or the polar vortex doesn't completely disintegrate, but it disintegrates over the Arctic, meaning that high up, where we're looking at this, over the North Pole, we do not have westerly momentum at all. Now, if you go over to the weatherwithcool.com, this is a slice through the atmosphere here. We've got 1 HPA right at the top of the stratosphere, all the way down to 1,000. That's getting towards the surface, and 850 HPA to 500. That's pretty much the troposphere where we are, where our weather does take place. So you can see, yeah, a lot going on here. There's a big slice within the atmosphere, many, many kilometres. And you can see high up in the atmosphere, we got these blues and pinks, and it looks pretty shocking. And because it is, it's near enough off the charts in terms of easterly winds. 40 meters per second in the easterly direction. That is ridiculous. This time of year, the polar vortex is weakening naturally, but it's normally around 15 to 20 meters per second in a westerly direction, a positive direction. Midwinter can up to around 50 or 60 meters per second. So it is inevitably weakening, but look at this. The polar vortex is just destroyed. High up in the atmosphere, over the North Pole, we're not seeing any westerly momentum now, perhaps until September, late August, September, when the polar vortex reforms for next winter. Now, on the bottom charts, you can see the anomalies, and this again just shows you how ridiculously weak, 60 to 65 meters per second in different sort of levels of the stratosphere. We are lower than we would normally be. Another one interesting thing is you can't see it propagating through the atmosphere too much. Longer term, you can see it dropping, but not really getting to the troposphere at this stage. Now, this is only a 14-day slice. So sudden stratospheric warmings can have a week, 2, 3 weeks perhaps before they get towards the surface. So I wouldn't be surprised if we didn't see any direct impacts from this to the final third of March. So interesting seeing that major event high up in the atmosphere, but not too much going on lower down. You can see this westerly, this easterly momentum here. This is associated with the blocking that we're seeing over the next week or so. So you can see what a blocking pattern would look like where we do have some distortion over the North Pole. So you can see a bit more of a westerly momentum there into mid-March after that colder spell breaks, but then perhaps a bit more easterly momentum there later on. Now, if we do go over to the weather is talked, I'm going to have a look at the Ensemble chart here. Now, this is a very interesting chart. I've shown this before, and you see the black line is generally where the polar vortex should be, the westerly momentum. And you can see normally peaks 30, 40 meters per second, somewhere around Christmas period, really. But as I said, it can get up to 50, 60, 70, or even up towards 75 if we look at record-breaking times. You can see the blue line is the analysis of this winter so far, and actually the polar vortex has been ridiculously strong, even setting some daily records here in around late January. Now, it has had lots of deviations, small warmings, and has had some quite big warmings recently, but then look at this huge drop from a good chunk above average, above that black line where that blue is there, down towards zero, where it's just about now. I think it's just slightly now around zero as I'm recording this. Then look at these greens. That is the GFS ensembles, and look, all of them drop down to -20. Not quite reaching record territory. As you can see here, late winter, we do see a higher chance of a sudden stratospheric warming. But you can see it is getting very, very close to daily records. And then we do see a rebound, which is always going to happen. It's always going to recover slightly. And again, there's a lot of uncertainty, but the majority keep us in negative territory. So the polar vortex never recovers. And then perhaps another significant warming, see another dip. And by this point, we're getting towards the period where the polar vortex inevitably crosses zero around mid-April. So you can see the polar vortex doesn't naturally weaken and does go to moderate to negative territory for all of the summer, down towards kind of -10 territory. But look at this. It is just going to be there about a month, maybe 5 weeks earlier than it should be, which is a big chunk. That is about 15 to 20% of its whole existence. It only exists for about 5 or 6 months a year. So if it's already losing a month, it's almost 20% of its whole time above the North Pole for the winter is gone. So that is going to have some knock-on of impacts, and it'll be very interesting to see what they are. Another reassurance here, it's not just wobbling in one run here. These are the last 4 GFS runs, midnight runs, and you can see all are going from very strong down to very weak. Down to -20, rebounding to just around zero, but mostly keeping below, and then another warming, and it doesn't look like it's going to get close to zero until the end of March, and even then, don't think it is going to increase beyond that as well. And of course, we've got to check out the latest ECMWF, and these are the latest ECMWF ensembles, very similar, just above zero at the moment, dropping down to around -20 as we head into the next couple of days. This red line is the bottom 10 percentile, so we are in very low territory, and then you can see a slight recovery, but no ensemble members get it above zero. And then about 90% of ensemble members keep it well below zero through the end of March and slowly into April, when naturally this red line, where the polar vortex should normally be, mean values, slowly trends towards zero. The blue line, which is the mean of our ensembles, keeps it well below zero. And yeah, ridiculous. I've never really seen a chart like this. Again, it has happened before, but not in the last few years. And yeah, very interesting. And I'm being honest, I don't know what the impacts will be from this prolonged period of easterly momentum. Yeah, it could have some quite profound and prolonged impacts. Whenever you get a big sudden stratospheric warming, you normally get a big shock. And that's why we saw the big beast in the east, and then it sort of subsided. But yeah, don't know what this sort of prolonged easterly momentum will do. Definitely a stronger chance of amplification of the jet stream. Wacky patterns developing doesn't necessarily mean it will be very cold. Of course, amplified jet stream, big blocks this time of year, could set up over Scandinavia or perhaps across Northern Europe and waft the air into the Mediterranean. So we could actually go very warm. This time of year, wherever that block sets up, it could give some quite, as I said, wacky temperatures, wacky conditions throughout the rest of spring. So we'll have to keep a very close eye on it. And finally, this is the ECMWF operational weekly mean anomalies. And you can see big red high up in the atmosphere. And you see those reds go nowhere over the next few weeks, meaning we are in positive anomaly. I.e. weaker than average winds. And you see right towards the end of the run, those anomalies do disappear. It goes back to kind of neutral. But we must remember, late April, neutral is an easterly flow. So we're not looking at any westerly momentum in the stratosphere for the rest of this winter, or for the rest of the polar vortex winter, which is September through to April. So yeah, very interesting, this sudden stratospheric warming. Again, if this sort of pattern occurred 4 weeks ago, 5 weeks ago, early February, then the hype would be real for perhaps a major cold spell. Something, maybe not on the scale of the Beast from East, that is once in a many decade event, but potentially a major cold spell. With this sort of pattern being later on in the winter into early spring, I doubt we'd see anything major. There could be a very cold easterly that could develop, but I do think there could be some very up and down conditions over the coming weeks. Does not look like it's going to be a predictable, easy to forecast, high pressure dominated spring. There's going to be a lot of different patterns around, and I suspect what we're seeing at the moment, going from 20 degrees on Sunday through to 6 or 7 by Tuesday, I think swings like that could be quite common from the looks of this. But at the same time, no sun stratospheric warming is the same. so we can't say exactly what will occur. But yeah, it's going to be a very interesting watch over the next few weeks. So do stay tuned, and I'll keep you updated with any changes that go in the models. But yeah, be very interesting watching some of the ensembles and operational charts. So I do think we'll see some really weird outputs, regardless of if they do have any validity. The operational runs and ensembles normally do produce some really weird runs with the sudden stratospheric warmings. They try to deal with all of that high pressure propagating through the different levels of the atmosphere. So anyway, thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you again for another video soon.